Music to the noise, yeah, the mess we make. Machine Pun Kelly get caught in the fray. Facts and logic with a twist of chest. Strip it down to truth, yeah, forget the rest. Humor pulls the lights right out of the park. Look beyond the shadows that set the dark. Sparks of laughter fire up the night, bringing clarity when they blur the fight. Cut through the chaos, yeah, the tangled lies. Machine Pun Kelly with a set of clear eyes. Truths and jokes gonna rock this show. Step into light where the real facts glow.
Hello, and I'm Machine Pun Kelly. Today I am joined with Noelle Cook. Noelle, are you ready to step into the light where the real facts glow?
I am.
Do you like my jamming little theme song there?
Yeah. I was reading the lyrics as it went.
So this is my whole show has been to just learn about things from people that actually know what they're talking about, because too often it's easy to learn from people that don't know what they're talking about. And you've been studying like just conspiracy theories, and you even literally wrote a book on it, right?
I did actually, and I just got my early advanced reading copies. So this is the cover. It'll be a hardback, but these are I'm supposed to take these around to bookstores, so you will never forget this cover. And it is called The Conspiracists, shockingly enough, Women, Extremism, and the Lure of Belonging. So,
and you've made a documentary, which
yes,
I found this just fascinating. I wanted to play it. I'm just going to go and play the beginning. I think it's only about a minute. So,
okay.
But I want to share this with everybody.
January 6th was a setup. I made national news hanging out the window. So more importantly is that they're being stripped of.
So I'm here with Yvonne at Freedom Corner. You were just convicted for January 6th. And
I was just sentenced.
It does feel like the world's going slightly mad, right?
Right, but it's just darkness being exposed. We've never been to the moon, they're lying.
We've never been to the moon.
Not through traveling through space.
Yeah, they control the weather. They modify hard. There's a set. Who controls the weather? The elite.
And I'm like, what the heck? So I go, and this is before I knew about McDonald's too. I got myself an Egg McMuffin.
What about McDonald's?
They use human meat.
Use human meat.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So when you're terrified, your adrenaline glands pump adrenaline into your blood, and they drink the blood of terrified people, and that is what keeps them younger. And it also
Who drinks the blood of terror?
these elite pedophiles.
My head's exploding.
I hope that your documentary comes out in time, but to be truth, I think the shift will become before then. And maybe this trip is just meant to help you raise your consciousness.
How exhausted are you?
Physically or mentally? I think the mental exhaustion just comes from the realization of just how far gone so many people in this country are. Not just this country, globally.
And that's it. That was your trailer for what's the name of the documentary you made?
It is also called The Conspiracists. Yeah, I was in the process of writing the book, or it started as an academic project, which turned into a book. And then we did the documentary kind of spontaneously. It really wasn't planned. It was just Liz and me, and we did this road trip with one of the January 6th defendants after her sentencing. So none of these things were planned. They all just happened. And as some of the women in my book would say, there are no accidents. So I suppose I choose to believe that it was all meant to be.
So is she pardoned now, or? Did she?
Yes, both of the women in the film that you saw, they already served their time. One of them,
Oh, they were both.
Tammy.
They were
Yeah,
both.
both of them.
Okay.
Yeah, they did not know each other, and there was no plan for them to meet. But Liz and I had planned to go talk to Tammy and film it. And at the same time, Yvonne had asked me to come to her sentencing. And so I did that. And then we needed to drive a car back across country for one of her children. And so she came along to Pennsylvania and ended up participating in the film. And as it turned out, Liz kind of created the film with Yvonne as a focus. And Yvonne is a great teacher if you want to learn about conspiracies. She's taught me everything I know. So the film all happened pretty organically, and it all did. So even the book, I was approached to write a book. I didn't set out to do that. So, it's been a real interesting ride.
So do you still have a relationship with Yvonne? Does she like how does she feel about being a part of that? Does she feel like she got a chance to preach her gospel and she's grateful, or does she feel like
She hasn't seen it yet, so she hasn't
Oh.
seen it yet, so she doesn't know. But that's a good question because what I approached this with the motto, of kind of what I really wanted to do is understand what I was seeing and what it meant to them. My goal was not to push back or to change minds, but to learn what this meant. And that's what I did. I spent 3 years talking to both of these women over time and learning about them. I spent the first year learning about people on paper, a whole bunch of different people. But at the end of the day, these two women were both very honest. We may not share the same reality at times. We don't believe the same politics at all, but they're honest people who, as a middle-aged woman, I found some commonalities with and we spent most of our time talking about those things, not politics, which was interesting. And Yvonne was more of a teacher because she inhabits the realm that scholars call conspirituality, which is a mixture of conspiracies and New Age spirituality. And the New Age spirituality is not a problem at all as far as belief systems go, but it's when you merge in the conspiratorial thinking with it, which becomes very anti-government, and it starts to go into anti-Semitism, it starts to go into racism, even if the participants aren't fully aware.
Yeah.
Because a lot of this is done coded and signaled and imagery, aesthetics matter. I studied trad wives quite a bit, and it was a very aesthetic online movement. But when you really started to look at hashtags and you started to actually look at the messaging, you realized there was a lot more going on. And the average person might not recognize that. But
drag wives?
people I'm sorry? Trad wives? Trad wives. Trad wives is a movement that became kind of mainstreamed knowledge sometime around the pandemic, when everyone was staying at home. Women were staying at home, homeschooling their own children. Everyone was online looking for alternative remedies to boost their immune systems from the pandemic. And so there was a whole ecosystem already in place online in a wellness community that knew how to focus on and capitalize on the pandemic. And I watched various groups signaling to QAnon believers. So, because this communication is often done through signaling, you might start following someone because you're looking for a natural remedy to boost your immune system. And the next thing you know, the algorithms, because of the original posters' hashtags, the influencers' hashtags, the algorithms will now start sending you much more extreme things to view, until pretty soon, if I'm following somebody who might be, the yoga crunchy mom thing that went through the alternative health pipeline, who might have just been concerned because Jenny McCarthy raised the idea that vaccines caused autism back in 2008. And so they got a little bit concerned and they started doing their own research, and they're doing it earnestly, and maybe they're just making nice, healthy choices for their families. But pandemic rolls around, the QAnon conspiracies roll around, and savvy influencers saw how to exploit that. And I watched it say, the cult Love Is One. which there was an HBO documentary out about this cult in Colorado called Love Has Won. And I found their postings on the Wayback Machine, and I see in February of 2020, for the first time, they're doing WWG, where we go one, where we go all. They'd never had done that before, but they're also linking to their shop where they're selling remedies that they claim can either cure or prevent disease, colloidal silver, for example.
I find it funny that they always say follow the money when it
Mhm.
comes to the vaccines, but then in the same video they pitch their own unique little supplement or
Mhm. Well, yeah, and that was one thing I admired about Yvonne, for as much as she is into these things and believes these things will help and cure, she's very put off at the commodification of what she calls gifts. She believes if you're given a gift, that you should share that freely with humanity, which is a really interesting take, because we're talking about now, collective mutual aid. This is sounding kind of socialist, right? When you're talking about cooperative living, and so that's what's so interesting and contradictory about so many of these conspiracies, is because they really are steeped in some pretty awful stuff when you break them down. But there's also ways that I've watched it soften certain beliefs that may have existed during, say, the days that she was heavily involved in an evangelical church. But then it's the conspiracies that flip things kind of upside down. And when people believe extraordinary things that stray from a shared reality we might otherwise have, that's when it becomes a problem. And for the people believing those things, it causes further isolation. As you can imagine, if Tammy's sitting across the table from, say, at a high school reunion, right? And she starts talking about McDonald's using human meat and hamburgers.
Oh, by the way, that was my favorite scene from the trailer when she's talking about that. And the dog's looking out the window like, what?
Yeah, but this is another great example of how flexible conspiracies are. So that was filmed in September of 2023. So fast forward now, when Trump and Musk and RK Jr. are pictured in a McDonald's, eating McDonald's, right? And so I kind of like, oh, how is this going to go over? Well, the rationale was the next day there was an AI generated picture of Elon Musk holding McDonald's bags, and the conspiracy, and what I saw, the conclusion was Musk bought out, I guess, all the franchises in the world, or nation, or wherever this is going on, and it's over, it's done, we're good.
They're not doing the human meat anymore because Musk bought McDonald's,
I guess, and he cleaned it up quietly. Yeah. So, that's an old conspiracy. It was a joke, like long time ago. There's been, that's what's so bizarre about some of these conspiracies. And I did not set out to study conspiracies. I was hoping I wouldn't have to at all, because I had no interest in it. But then what I was interested in was the January 6th women, because I was at January 6th as a photographer, amateur photographer, because I lived nearby and I was looking for a new research project. And certainly didn't expect to get, I was looking to take photos of protest signs and maybe do some sort of visual anthropology project between like women's marches and Stop the Steal, and see how women responded that way because of my graduate program. And then it turned out to be, I had pictures of something very different. And just to be clear, I was masked. I was far away from the building with a 400 zoom lens. But I was just trying to get a feeling for who was there. And what really stood out to me was how many women my age were there. How many women that looked like me. The first 100 women arrested, the only pattern that any of them held was generational, and the age cohort that they belonged to, and most of them were Gen X or very young boomers. And so that was interesting to me, because okay, so many of us don't have small children anymore, but we still have caregiving responsibilities. And so it seemed like such a bold move to do something that would put you behind bars, So I was just curious as to what would drive that. I was looking at what the gender paths of radicalization were, and it quickly turned into something incredibly different. Not quickly, but after I started talking to the people. And that's when you can't shoot, when there's not that barrier of when you're studying something on paper,
Mhm.
you're analyzing and judging and critiquing something that
Mhm.
you have very little information about when it really
Mhm.
comes down to it. And so when I actually started talking to people, it was very easy to assess early on, am I going to learn something from this person, or is this person just out for the attention and the grift? And there were several of them that were totally doing that. But then these two women were very honest
Mhm.
and unassuming, and there was they truly wanted to share stories, or find community, or not be lonely, or have someone to talk to, depending on who it was. And that was when I started kind of thinking about this project in a very different way, and started realizing that what I was being drawn to was the human aspect of it. Even though it was very odd and unusual to be having these kinds of conversations with people who think so differently from me.
Mhm.
But the interesting thing is, with the conspiracists I've talked to, when they talk about their past, conspiracies aren't involved. They just talk about their past in factual terms.
Mhm.
It's the present and the future that is usually explained in
Interesting.
conspiracies. But it's a coping mechanism in lots of ways for some people. Conspiracies are a coping mechanism for many. It's a way to not feel powerless in a really chaotic, uncertain time, which is, I think, what happened with some of the COVID stuff back during the pandemic.
Mhm.
Um, I think that there's a lot of
Well, I
people
was
already read.
the idea, from what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, but when there's something just absolutely chaotic that comes out of nowhere that doesn't have a reason, like there's
Mhm,
no, they want to find a reason for it, and they want to find a motive for it. They want to find who caused it and why it was caused, so that they
mhm.
can make sense out of it. And like, things can't just happen to them. Like, there's, to some people, they just, and so they kind of shoehorn in an explanation that makes their world make sense again. Is that accurate? Am I?
Parts of it. There's no one size fits all, and a lot of extremism research and conspiracy research has been done through a male lens too. And some of the reasons
Hmm.
that women believe conspiracies are very different than
I
men.
was going to ask about that. Yeah, because
Yeah, I think. Go ahead.
I think it's fascinating that you're kind of focusing on the women conspiracists, and I was like, oh, gee, is there a difference between why women check into these things and why men do?
Right. And most things do in our culture tend to focus on the dominant population, both in terms of power, the dominant population in terms of power, which are white men. That's why women's medical, why we still can't figure out things for women's health, because we're too focused on, things like Viagra for men. So, yeah, there's a big difference. Women get forgotten, and women are completely underrepresented. And that was one reason. Again, this was originally an academic project, so it fit into what I was doing. And so I was like, okay, what the thing that's drawing me to my photos that I took that day the most are so many women that look like they could sit next to me at a soccer game, or I'd say hi to at the grocery store, but yet we're apparently like just like seriously polar opposite here. And so that was kind of where I started to that's why I focused on middle-aged women. It was also a wide open area, because who cares about middle-aged women?
Mhm.
Once women turn 50. So funny, I just got some vitamin or something, and so it has the directions on it, and then it's like for women like 20 to 30 and 30 to 40. There's like 50, anyone over 50 and over. So they take women who are 50 and they put them in the same category as women who are 95,
So,
right?
like, after
It's,
50, you basically just,
you're done.
yeah,
Yeah.
you're a senior citizen.
And I think that's one reason that so many middle-aged women are looking for new identities, new purpose, new sense of belonging. Because when you hit 50, you do become invisible, because what we value women for in this country, and what feminism has fought for, was reproductive rights, right? And contribution to the GDP at the same level as men, right?
Mhm.
Fighting for equal wage. I mean, those are all very important things. But when you turn 50, you're kind of past your prime earning years potentially, and you no longer reproduce. And so you start to become almost surplus a surplus human, which if you look at what's going on right now in the health and human services policies, they're showing us exactly who are the surplus human beings and who are not the productive members of society anymore. In fact, J.D. Vance said that the only reason for women past post-menopause is to be caregivers for grandchildren. So, that is how women feel, I think. Many women can identify with that in some way that are over 50, and there's a push to, you're still expected to look young. Everyone jokes about Mar-a-Lago face, right? And it's funny, but in that culture, youth is prized.
Yeah.
And signs of age shun you, basically. If you're not Botoxed fully, and people can't, if your face isn't so distorted that you can't guess if you're 40 or 60, because it's just not, that's what it is. That's a requirement if you want to circulate in that group.
Seems like Trump's whole evaluation of women is based solely on whether or not he wants to have sex with them. And that tends to, including his own daughter. But
but it's not just Trump.
But
let's think about why does Facebook exist?
That culture is not just confined to him. That's Mar-a-Lago culture. It's not just Trump.
But it didn't just start there.
Women, they're looking for some sort of identity. Is that it? And
yeah, there's some of that, especially in midlife. Again, a lot of women have wrapped their entire purpose because again, our culture prizes women motherhood. When you're a mother, there's certain expectations that you got to try to fulfill, and then all of a sudden one day that's over. And so, I'm a perfect example of this. I got married at 24. I married a lawyer. I had 3 kids. I got to be a stay-at-home mom, which was what I always wanted to do. As a first-generation latchkey kid whose mom worked full-time, I wanted to do all of the things my mom couldn't do, which is be the chaperone on the field trips and all that stuff. But then what happens is, when 23 years of marriage ends in divorce, the kids are grown, and I'm like, well, who am I now? Right? My entire identity has been built around motherhood. And I think that lots of women, even women in careers, have to deal with that feeling, and on top of that, they might have even guilt because they weren't, motherhood is not an easy proposition. and being a middle-aged woman isn't an easy proposition either, because literally everyone just kind of forgets you exist. And then you add our generation, which is Gen X, and they actually skip us. They just go straight from boomers to millennials. So I think there's a lot of these women. I think there's a reason that this generation is having a hard time.
I'm Gen X too, so I totally get that.
Yeah,
and there's like they've got every single Gen except Gen X, and it's like
right.
Whatever.
Well, and there was a study that came out on Twitter about the biggest purveyors of disinformation. Okay, it turned out to be a very small group of accounts, but almost all of them were older women who, and I think the rationale behind it was that they retweet indiscriminately. Which leads me to something that's really important for the conspiracies are not confined to the right or to MAGA or to Trump supporters. They are across the board. And what I've really been observing since 2023 is there are plenty of liberal conspiracies that get spread around. And the problem that it bothers me more probably in that way, because I expect it over here, but over here, I understand I can't have purity, right? But I certainly want honesty and truth. And there's a lot, I think, since because platforms have become monetized and so many Gen Xers have had to try to reinvent themselves. We're the first generation also who kind of created the gig economy. The first generation that had to go analog to digital. So as jobs are phasing out and people age out of different occupations, because again, we prize youth. And so, the technology moves fast and you're going to be replaced by the next wave, as we saw with what happened with Doge, right? And so I see a lot of people my age spending a lot of time online since the pandemic, especially since remote working became a thing, who are all now digital creators or content creators, which is great. I think it's fabulous that people have an opportunity to create conversations like we're having and to to promote different things for themselves. But we have to be really careful because there's competition. So it's very competitive. There's how many podcasts out there. There's how many, there's so much of this now that it gets very competitive. And I've watched people over the years that, are good people, who are smart people, but because the business model demands keeping your audience engaged at all times, you have to keep coming up with more and more bombastic, click-worthy stuff, which leads some of our side also into the area of disinformation. People might say, I'm just asking questions, but when you're a trusted source with a large following and you're just asking questions, your followers take that and run with it. And so I think that democracy demands honesty and truth, right? We can't have a democracy if we're not going to be honest and true. And I think that is the one thing I hope that liberal influencers can really take to heart, that they have a huge role to play in helping save this stuff. And there's a lot of people on the left, and there's a distinction. I hate using the labels because I'm not always accurate about far left. There's all these whole of a spectrum.
And nobody has the same.
There are some activists, I guess is a better way of saying it, that will turn their nose up at some of the things like the No Kings protests this weekend, right? And say, what does that do? Well, it does a lot, actually. It's a movement builder. It's keeping people engaged and energized, and it's a really great strategy. And it's what MAGA's done ever since January 2021. There's bus tours, there's rallies, there's tons and tons of events that the truck convoy that took place was a movement builder. So you could participate in person, you could participate on an overpass with flags, or you could participate online or through donations. And so I think the left needs to do better with that movement building piece, but also really stay authentic and on it. Not purity tests. Everyone's style is going to be different, but just really try to hold each other accountable for telling the truth if we care about actually creating a functional democracy.
What is an example of a conspiracy theory on the left?
Well, I mean, lots of people that I remember talking about, Kamala won the election, and it was stolen from her. And at first I thought maybe it was sarcasm, like trying to play out the other side. But then I realized, no, people really do believe that. And yet we were saying, there's no evidence to support that, number one. But everyone's going to then say, no, it's the hidden. This is what conspiracies do. There's got to be a reason this happened. It can't just be that 7 white women my age voted for him a second time by 7 points.
Yeah.
And the next group that also voted for him were their sons. So again, what's going on with Gen X and what's going on with middle-aged women that we're raising our sons to also? And why are trad wives becoming a thing again? These are our daughters. And why are they looking at this traditional subservience to a male figure and devoting their lives to motherhood as some glamorous kind of thing, which is a great thing. I did it. So I feel like I was a stay-at-home mom. I understand, and I would do it again. But it comes with a price, and no one talks about those prices when they're pushing that. And I just think that we've got an issue with sensationalism, which again is how trad wives became a thing, which is how so many January 6ers became internet famous, with large platforms. And, there was a huge cottage industry that was created out of January 6th between podcasters and influencers. And, the problem is, when you start to do this for so long, and I understand monetization. Time is money. I mean, you're doing a service, you're creating content, but when you become completely dependent and reliant on the ecosystem we've created now of the attention economy, where everyone's vying for attention, and that's when it's human nature to want to keep. It's competitive. You got to keep going. You got to keep pushing it.
Something unique. You need to say something that stands out. You're not
going to make people feel something.
Millions of views by just saying what everybody else is saying. You need
but the problem is we get millions of views by enraging people. We want to make people angry or afraid.
Yeah, rage-ertainment.
What's that?
Rage-ertainment, I call that.
Yeah, it is.
And Fox News, does it, and and a lot of social media accounts do it. And I find myself frequently correcting people on the left. Like there's this thing going around that if if the president gets impeached, that means his whole cabinet gets impeached, based on a misreading of the Constitution. And it's like, no, that's not the case. It's like, it's easier to go viral by saying something that isn't true, that people are going to click on, and that's going to make, there's an incentive, like you're saying, to actually be outlandish, to make people angry, into rather than to make people think and be logical. It's easier to just make people angry. You're going to make a lot more, because you're going to get people that agree with you, and you're going to get people that disagree with you if you say something outlandish enough.
Right, and there's varying extremes, right? There's some organizations will put out a real clickbaity type headline, but then the story has some substance to it, or maybe it's not nearly as dramatic as the headline suggested. But then there's other people who just put out flat out lies, or get to that point when they're, So I always keep trying to if someone is making a statement, they're showing you a picture, but there's no source, no link. Demand sources, demand accuracy. When someone's doing that, ask them for a link. If they don't provide a link, assume they have no credible source. Because I think that is something. I think there's a certain responsibility that anyone who's an influencer and cares about democracy needs to have. I think that the responsibility is to teach your followers how to be media savvy and good consumers. And teach your following to be consumers of truth and not rage clickbait and fear clickbait, because that's not helping anybody. I think.
You find that these women that have gotten into conspiracy theories, did they just like dive into the swimming pool, or did it start with?
It started slowly. It started slowly.
One thing that, at a time, and then this led to that.
One woman watched Fed Up or one of those documentaries. It was a documentary about sugar and how the government had hidden the results of what processed sugar does on the human body. And so this person was going through their own weight loss journey at the time, so was very focused. And like, we've been lied to about sugar. What else are we being lied to? It's COVID now. She's online doing searches. She's finding all the clickbait. She's doing it. And a lot of people aren't discerning, because the other thing about the conspiratorial communities and the wellness community, for example, again, these are communities. And the more outlandish your beliefs get, the more isolated from in real life people you become. You're more isolated from those groups now, because you're saying you're not conforming to that group anymore. So you start to find that these people completely are living online. They get everything: purpose, identity, belonging, community online. Which is why Rich Logis, who runs Leaving MAGA, a nonprofit out of Florida, he started that back in about 2023 as a former Trump supporter and conspiracist in believing stolen elections. When I say conspiracist, that includes believing elections were stolen. Until you have actually proof of that, so he understands what I'm saying about the community piece, because his whole goal is to create a community that people want to maybe try to see what it's like to be in a more mainstream reality, whether the people, they can come into that space and be welcome. And that's super important, because when you spend as many hours online a day as some of these people do, if you stop, what are you going to replace it with?
So that makes me think of something that I had not thought of before. Is I know with, like, there's a in my family, there is in my extended family, there's a family that kind of everybody has shut off, and he has shut himself off, and he and his wife have shut themselves off from everybody else. And so there's this kind of bubble that forms, MAGA bubble, where MAGA only associates with MAGA. And I don't want to say non-MAGA only associates with non-MAGA, because that implies there's only two groups, but there's like everybody else, and there's MAGA, and everybody else shuts off MAGA, and MAGA shuts themselves off from everybody else. When they want to emerge from their bubble, they have nowhere to go, so they end up just staying in their bubble. Or at least that's the thought I just had, that it kind of, there's a reinforcement going on because they don't have anywhere to go. Is that
Right. Yeah, yeah, there's yes, totally. Yes, there is a reinforcement because as you become, I would use Yvonne as an example of that. So as she became more interested in the New Age spirituality, it started to really kind of uh, butt up against what her evangelical church was teaching. And so it was during the pandemic with some of the decisions they were making and some of the things they were saying that she started to question whether or not she could be a part of organized religion anymore. And so because they were discounting what she was telling them about various, very much into the Save the Children piece. And that's when we talked about conspiracies being, women are drawn to conspiracies for different reasons. The pandemic was the perfect storm of reasons for women because it touched on all the spheres of womanhood and motherhood. It was education, it was health, it was nutrition, it was child raising and morality teaching. It was all of that. And so you can kind of see, which my book kind of traces those themes of the culture wars, where you have the mama bears, because women are oftentimes in some more traditional spaces expected to be more background, even when they are doing a lot of the organizing. But when you're fighting in defense of children, when you're trying to protect your family, women are given a lot more leeway in the things that they can say and do, because we're supposed to be fierce, right? Mama bears are fierce. Everyone, that's the whole thing. You stay away from the mama bear, she'll get you. And so that I think that is a big part of what happened with COVID and why so many women were as vocal and demonstrative as they were on January 6th, because many of them were there either because of the QAnon conspiracies, Save the Children, or anti-vaccine positions.
I think there's a lot that has interested me on this. And like one thing, I got COVID little over a year ago, and I've had issues with long COVID since. But I found that I just cut out all processed foods from my diet, or at least all overly processed foods. I'll eat like I'll put a can of tomatoes in a pot of chili, but I won't eat canned chili, And by just doing my own cooking, basically, I haven't counted calories or anything like that. I've lost 50 pounds.
Yeah.
Just by eating real food, and I call it a food diet. And I don't buy processed flour. I have a mill. I grind my own flour and make my own bread. And so, like, my bread is a lot healthier. I can eat a slice of bread, and it's like a meal. And so I'm like I've gotten into that. I've watched a lot of. You don't just wake up one day and know how to make your own bread from fresh milled flour. So I've been like on a lot of these YouTube channels and stuff to learn how to do it. And I noticed that there's like a mix of, there are people that are on the left and people that are on the right. It's like one of those areas where there's a lot of crossover, and like, I don't know too many people that are actually in favor of pedophilia. But I think just about everybody on both sides of the aisle now has been called a pedophile by somebody at some point.
Yes.
Pedophile. Like we actually have managed to start at a place that should not be divisive and make that divisive.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure where I'm going with that, but do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, the first thing that came to mind was like the whole Epstein files thing, right? You would think, again, after 5 solid years of Save the Children, and so many people claiming about this global, this elite cabal of child sex traffickers. Well, we actually have one, and yet it's not coming out. And I thought this is the moment that they turn on them, but that's not what's happening. And lots of that shock and awe, lots of it's distract, but there's a lot of signaling. If you recall, about a week and a half ago, on Trump's Truth Social account, a very strange AI-generated deepfake video came out. And it was him, it was Lord Trump on Fox News doing a segment with Trump talking about med beds and how every American was about to get their med bed card. And that was up for about 12 hours on his official account with no commentary. Many people at first didn't recognize it as AI generated. You know, it's got Fox News' ticker tape at the bottom, crime, and so that's signaling. What
How
that's
did they get on
saying,
his account?
he put it there.
So
He
he
put
didn't
it
know
on.
it was fake?
That's just what signaling is. If you remember back to Trump rallies and there would be music played with thunder in the background, that was a signal to QAnon conspiracists to keep the faith that he may not be able to always address them by name in public, but he knows you're there, and he knows you have to understand that QAnon conspiracists believes that Trump is what they call a white hat. He's a good guy here to save the day. So is Putin. Right. I watched that happen in real time on the night that Russia invaded Ukraine. The groups I was in trying to determine who was the good guy, who was the bad guy. And by the end of the night, the community had decided that Putin was the good guy, another white hat working along with Trump. And so when Trump signals to them from a public stage as a person of the highest authority in our country, of course, these are the faithful. He's their prophet. They believe him. And I watched, after the rallies that would happen, and he would drop little signals that the average person wouldn't necessarily pick up. Most people didn't probably understand what the heck they were seeing when they saw med beds, because it's a fictional thing. It does not exist. But if you're a conspiracist, you believe that it's technology that's been hidden from you by the elite for a long time, when they could have just given it to you and let you cure your mother. You let your dad grow his legs back when they're amputated because he had diabetes and no health insurance. So that's part of the anger. There's the need to believe that there is someone behind the scenes here to save the day. It is a form of faith. I don't really see it that unlike how some Christians or some religious people approach their organized religion. It's praying for something, keeping the faith that it might happen, right? Mm-hmm. Well, and then they get a sign. Mm-hmm. They get a sign. Well, that's what Trump did with the med beds. It was a sign because that conspiracy-minded base knows exactly what that's a signal about. It means they're coming. It's finally happening. Even if it doesn't happen, there'll be an adaptation to why not. It is a never-ending continuum until an individual conspiracist has a moment that hits too personally for them to deny. And then perhaps they start to question some things. And that's why having communities to turn to where they can expect truth and facts are important, because that's what Rich Loges is experiencing, is people who will have a moment where maybe someone is a naturalized, maybe someone immigrated here from Cuba, they've done all their paperwork, and all of a sudden they get sent, somebody gets deported. That might be that moment that they go, hey, wait a minute, and maybe that one person will, but don't expect a collective community to be flipping all at once. That's not how it works. It's cult-like behavior, but it is not a cult. This is free will. And that's the problem.
I think there are some people that, and this is there are people that will believe that will base what they know on what they believe. And there are people that will base what they believe on what they know.
Yes.
And the people who base their belief on what they know, when they learn new information, will change their belief according to that. If people base what they know on what they believe, when new information comes that doesn't align with their beliefs, they either just reject it out of hand, or they just kind of change whatever, the one person in my family that they're MAGA were saying that God had told them that Joe Biden would not get inaugurated. And then after he got inaugurated, then they shifted it to, well, that wasn't the real inauguration. The next one is, I don't know, they had like this. And then, and then it was, he wasn't the real Joe Biden. He was, and it's
clone.
Yeah. And things never have to reconcile with each other. Like January 6th was a hoax led by the FBI.
Right.
But it was Donald Trump was in charge of the FBI at the time. And why would why would the Democrats want January 6th to prevent Joe Biden from they're about as consistent as Donald Trump fouls. And like what is that, I mean, this is, I'm not the expert here. Is there something to what I'm saying that
it's a system of belief. And so, of course, it's going to be flexible and adaptable, just like any other system of belief, right? Again, until it really comes up against some sort of core thing that impacts you personally. And that's why we are where we are today in lots of ways, is we don't get engaged with something until it personally affects us.
Once the leopard starts eating your face, everything changes.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Or just, for example, there's another woman who just wrote her own book called The Mirror World, Erica Roach, who is a former QAnon conspiracist. And she, for her, she was a nurse. She had she had been trained in science. And so some things happened during COVID that made her kind of step back and think. And then when Trump was pushing the vaccine, the Operation Warp Speed, taking it himself, but then everyone's saying it's a population control, it's going to put nanochips in you, it's going to kill you, whatever. That was a real contradiction for her that she had to really start evaluating. And that's how she started asking questions and kind of worked her way out. But it was a very long process. It doesn't happen quickly, because you don't just lose that belief system, you lose your friends and the people that you've been hanging out with all day online.
Yeah. Oh, that's
a big piece.
That's something. And in that way, it has some cult-like characteristics to it, like your entire.
And we have the same thing on the left. That's what I want to make really clear. This is not just, I watch it on the left. For example, there's someone who consistently puts out disinformation. No, let me call it flat out lies, because it's not disinformation when it's a flat out lie. And no matter how many times this person's called out, because the way I have seen it is certain content creators, because they have to keep coming out with stuff. And I'm sure it's not easy to always find, right? I didn't think about that when we first started promoting the film. Liz was like, see if you can go on a podcast. And I'm like, I don't want to ask. I don't like self-promotion. She's like, dude, this isn't self-promotion. These are people who have no choice but to find content every week to keep the momentum going. And so I was like, oh, okay. I hadn't thought of it that way. So then when you think about that way, and then you watch these things that look so dysfunctional sometimes, and you start to look then at people's motivation. So why are you doing this? Is this to teach, like this, what you're doing right now is to teach something or to understand something, right? So I see value to that. But if people are just trying to engage people to just be enraged or fearful, and then of course set themselves up as the only one who can tell them the truth, which is exactly what conspiracists have done too, right? If you're not getting your truth from a variety of sources, if you're not requiring your influencers to provide you with evidence or links, or at least an explanation of how they came to this conclusion, right? That's what we need to do, is we need to hold the people who have power, which right now, for most of us, are influencers, as more and more people get fired from legacy media places. And so we've got now tons of different journalists who are all like scattered. Joy Reid, John Harwood. But we also have people like influencers, because it's not so much they want facts, but they want to feel something with their facts. And that's where the anxiety, keeping the anxiety going, keeping the fierceness going, so that people are going to keep clicking and retweeting no matter what it is we're sharing. That's how we become like the other side. And that's how we also become divided.
And as a content creator who has to chase down people to find interviews, I would just, like even this interview, you were busy with your book release. And so I had to wait a couple of weeks before you had a time slot available. It's not easy to always just go out and get an interview. And and there are times where I thought, if I just, put on a bikini and did reels, then I could probably get a lot more, views. It's like some of the content that goes viral, or, like you'll have these food videos where they like put Jello in make Jello salad in their toilet, or, and people are just like, oh, this is disgusting. Who would do this? Or what a brilliant, it's like people react all over the place, and it's outrageous. So it gets hits. What doesn't get hit is actually a reasonable, well thought out, researched conversation about something. Like
The
I spent
comparison
about
is like
4 hours this week researching one video that is probably going to get less than 1,000 views, you know, and
yeah,
somebody else is just going to, make Jello salad in a toilet and get
right.
25 million views,
Or make Trump dancing in a diaper to some sort
Yeah.
of silly music. But well, that's interesting because but this isn't new either. If you think about it, what we used to watch was like America's Funniest Home Videos versus PBS. You're watching Masterpiece Theater or you're watching America's Funniest Home Videos, right? Just like it's kind of this because that's human nature but there's got it. So I guess what I'm asking is for creators who maybe get more creative with how they're engaging their audiences, maybe more participatory, because that's what people are looking for, is a place of belonging, participation. People like to participate, and spaces aren't always the best place for that on places like X, but there's ways of engaging with influencers that don't lead to misinformation, disinformation, or clickbait, which then again causes divide, because you've got a lot of elitist, purist Democrats, and then you've got the leftist activists, you've got a whole bunch of the center, you've got a lot of different. We need to learn to kind of come together like the right has. When you can have someone who believes they're from a higher dimension of advanced beings, from another dimension, sitting next to someone who is a head covering Catholic or a born again Christian, and they're able to coalesce, and they're able to stay in their own lanes but support each other because they have a common goal. I hope that we can find a way to do that too. But I think the deal breaker for me is honesty, right?
Mhm.
I will amplify someone who's telling the truth. I will support a creator, even if their style might be not really my thing, even if a protest isn't really my kind of style either. There's value to all of these things in keeping people engaged, as long as we're dealing in truth, and because democracy truly does depend on that.
Mhm.
It really does.
And I think, we as consumers also need
Yeah.
to, like, we can't complain about clickbait and then click
Nope.
on clickbait. Like,
No, nor can you, and you can't create it and complain about it. And there's a lot, and you have to recognize it. And there's varying degrees and the whole bit. And I think creators need to hold other creators accountable, and audiences for sure. We need to be much more discerning. If someone is showing you evidence of something that's contradicting what your favorite influencer said, or what another a Democrat with a high following, just because they're Democrat does not mean I'm going to, if they're a liar, they're a liar. And that's not helpful to democracy, right? I think that's the problem, is we are playing on teams. We're tribal, and we have to start to hold if you want to be tribal, that's fine, then hold the other members accountable for honesty, at least.
I wrote
right?
a Substack article looking at the statistical chances of Donald Trump being able to steal the 2024 election. And the 2020 election, I was making the same arguments. It's impossible to steal a federal election. There's just too many people that would have to be involved. And so I did the math and, proved it is statistically impossible. And still people would come in and they'd say, oh, well, there was that county in New York where Donald Trump got all the votes and the Democrat won the Senate seat. Like, how is that possible? And it's like, Donald Trump got all the votes in 2022. That didn't change from 2020 to 24. That's like a Hasidic Jewish precinct where the rabbi endorses only a candidate for president, and pretty much every year, every election, everybody in that community votes for whoever the rabbi says to vote for. And so, and this happens every election. So this was nothing unusual. And, like, there are going to be anomalies. Anomalies are not proof that something was rigged. Actually, the lack of anomalies would be far more concerning.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally.
So anyway, but I got all this, I got not a lot, but I had some people react very negatively to that article because they're like, couldn't consider the possibility that it wasn't stolen, like you were saying, and just that there were just enough people that, for various reasons, didn't vote for Kamala Harris. And,
Right.
a lot of those reasons now are, it's being exposed. Donald Trump was not actually good for the economy, but, that's the thing I've been researching for the entire week.
Yeah, I think that that there is conspiratorial thinking also tends to appreciate authoritarian control. Again, it's being
Mm.
Yvonne is always
Is that
surprised
there's
because
one person can fix it? If one
yeah,
person is
yeah.
frustrated, another person can fix it?
Well, that's like we make fun of the whole thing. They say daddy, right? But that's actually what they kind of mean. It's like daddy comes home and takes care of it and fixes it, and you don't have to worry about it anymore, right? Isn't
Mhm.
that the stereotype or the trope or the whatever? It's there is something to that because when we were doing that film, Yvonne asked me straight up. She's like, "Well, I gave up my free will. Are you willing to give up your free will?" No, I'm not. Okay, well, that's what she's done. She's given up her free will, which to me means she's following. But her leader is something called spirit. So, but right now, Trump is the leader because he's a white hat. He's doing this
Mhm.
signaling to keep them all. Don't worry, guys. I'm still back here doing the thing. Just if you know, you know. That's what that is, and he's been consistently doing that for years now. And unfortunately, mainstream media doesn't talk to actual experts on a regular basis because there's a
Mhm.
lot of people they could have on and who could tell them all of that. Mike Rothschild, Kathleen Belew. I mean, there's tons of people who could explain all of this in accessible ways so that people would understand. But that doesn't sell. Media is also responsible. Legacy media is also responsible because they also they do the clickbait version of their
They
own
want the
stories.
ratings. It's all about the ratings.
Yep.
It's the same thing.
Mhm.
I've
Mhm.
invented what is the word, portmanteau, combining the word sycophant and fantasy. So it's
Mhm.
sycophantasy, and it ties into this whole thing with Trump. And you notice like all these illustrations, these AI illustrations, where he's like the Pope, or he's like
Mhm.
in a he's all in combat and everything, but they never make him look like he resembles him, but he's like always muscular, and he's
Right.
got like six-pack of abs, and
Yeah.
and like
Because
the
he's
idea of
yeah.
him in a military uniform with his bones
It,
burst.
it's ideal masculinity.
And so they have this fantasy of what Trump
Mhm.
is, and they're sycophants. So they're kind of like, I call it sycophantasy, and and it's not just the physical. It's like it extends into his policies, like, oh, tariffs are going to heal the world,
Right.
and things that are not fact based, but they just believe what he says without any consideration. You can't convince some people that they're going to
Mhm.
end, that the reason they're paying more at the grocery store has anything to do with tariffs. Coffee is not up 22% because there's a tariff on Brazil. Like,
Right.
they can't accept that thought. Oh, we can just grow it in Hawaii. Like,
Right. Yeah, yeah. Again, it's a belief system, and conspiracies fit into it where it's flexible and adaptable, and it's not about facts. It's about feelings. It's how it makes you feel and how you're allowed to react.
and I
Really.
appreciate the warning that we can do that on the left too, and we have to be careful with that.
Absolutely. And it's happening. I mean, I see it every day, and it's unfortunate because there's a lot of influencers out there who have very large followings who could help get out a message, and in a way that would appeal to more people if they would kind of back away from the clickbait, the disinformation. When you can start to see someone's motivation is just to shock and awe you or to ask for donations, you start to realize that maybe that motivation colors the type of information you might be getting, and that maybe they deserve a little bit more scrutiny. And you know there's people I see all the time who are constantly raising funds for things that look very grifty, let's put it that
Mhm.
way. when you're constantly getting sued and trying to cover your attorney's fees because you made some stupid choices, it's a great, but you're keeping your base, your followers enraged about this and afraid of what happens if they lose you, right? That's the mentality that happens. It's the same thing. You can make people believe extraordinary things if you make them feel a certain way.
Like I think when Trump, what he asked people to fundraise for him to cover up or to defend his loss in fraud, in a fraud case, it's like, I mean, just, and people, he raised millions and millions of dollars off of that, and it's just like, well, dude, haven't you learned your lesson? But
right. Well, there's an entitlement that goes along with that too. It's an entitlement that some people think they're going to be able to dance their way out of it, or the rules don't necessarily apply to them. But when you don't respond to a lawsuit and you end up getting a default judgment, you're going to be held accountable for that. And maybe you get it. Like, that's what I'm saying. When people do stupid things and then try to use that to make money off of, I always have to raise my eyebrows, because that's like something I'd be embarrassed to share. I'd be like, it's like I see people doing these things all the time, thinking the rules aren't going to apply to them. And there's an entitlement factor that goes with that for sure.
Have you had any?
It's the grifting
on the right or the left with bringing people out of a conspiracy theory mindset? Have you had success with that?
I've not really tried to do that. That hasn't been the focus. I did mostly. I was with right-wing women. I haven't really, ironically, some of the people on the left that I think are problematic with there might be a shred of truth there, but it's inflated to a sensational. It's like it's the National Enquirer versus reading Life magazine. Okay, it's like don't be the National Enquirer, where there might be a sentence or two that's actually real, but there's so much embellishing it around there that it becomes rhetorical hyperbole, where it's so absurdist you can't believe it, right? If you're thinking about it, unless you're feeling it. And then you're just believing that person because they're on your team, and that's what's happening. And that's happening with a couple 100, 300, 400,000 people at a time, depending on the influencer's level of influence. And that's why I think that people like you who have a huge following would be, hold your fellow creators accountable. Maybe there are so many creators now, and we're in a moment where so many people are relying on them for their news now, that maybe we need to start, maybe you guys need to start organizing. Maybe creators need to start organizing as a collective to fit, not sharing monetizing, but with ground rules and standards, same kind of journalistic standards. Yeah, maybe it would be really helpful considering where we're at.
Agreement that people would sign up for to,
Yeah.
I think if I post something believing it's true and then find out it's not true, I delete it. And then I'll
explain why
something in it. Well, I'll delete it and then I'll post, I deleted this because it was wrong.
Yeah, good.
But like something like that, where there was a pact that a social content.
Yeah, social contract kind of thing.
Kind of these are things that I will commit to doing. So
because this is the first time we're encountering this kind of thing, where influencers and social media has such a giant impact now on our culture as a whole. We have the entire cast of characters in government right now came from on either reality TV or online, right? And so I think that we have to reimagine what influence. You may not work for a broadcasting company. You may want to maintain your independence. Absolutely, that's a good idea right now. But how do we make it so that the average consumer who isn't necessarily very literate, media savvy, what are the ground rules for that? How do we create a trusted circle of information where I know if I see something Machine Pun Kelly posts, that I can read it and generally understand that that's truth, because you're interested in educating your audience, you're interested in teaching something with a larger goal of helping
Mhm.
us move into a more functional democracy, right? And so
Mhm.
if that's your goal, I know that's your goal, I see that's your motivation, I trust you. And you're one of my trusted sources, like Mike Rothschild, for example. He's a trusted source for me. I never question what Mike tells me because it's always well sourced.
Mhm.
And there's certain people I trust that there's certain people where integrity is number one for them,
Mhm.
and when integrity matters, it shows. And that's what I want to see more of. I want to have I spend so much time Googling people to see if I can, like, who is this? And do I want to talk to them? Do I want to, because I don't know who a lot of these people are. And neither do the average people online. They just know how they feel when they listen to you. They just know that you give them an opportunity to participate and to be part of a community of people. And
Mhm.
so you have a responsibility. In my opinion, I think creators with large followings have a responsibility, much like, we want newscasters to be on. I don't watch certain broadcasts for a reason, because I expect the people to be lying to me or to be slanting it so exaggerated or embellishing it so far past the truth that now it's just sensationalized and I don't really know what the story is, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of that.
I spent 15 years as a minister, as a Christian minister.
Oh,
And I went
interesting.
did a Bible study where I went through and I looked at every single thing that Satan said in the Bible. And he's called
Mhm.
the father of lies. But what's interesting, if you look at everything he said, technically, he never lies in the Bible. But what he does is he takes something that's true and asks a question about it in a way that leads someone to believe
Right.
something that isn't true.
Mm.
And then there's like another story where Jesus is at the well with the woman in Gethsemane, and he says, "Go bring me your husband." And she says, "I have no husband." And he says, "You have said rightly, but you live with one who is not your husband." So he kind of saw through it. And so there's something I've noticed that I call lying by telling the truth,
Right.
where you say something true, but it's with the intent to deceive. And you see a lot
Yes.
of that from a lot of content creators where they'll take something that's based in truth, but it actually
Yes.
is designed to make you believe a lie.
Right. Yeah.
But
And
you know,
usually that lie is to keep your engagement somehow.
and they'll say, "Where's the lie?" And,
Mhm.
and the lie is in your rhetorical question. That's where the lie is. Your
Right.
rhetorical question is supposed to have a different answer than the actual answer is. So,
Yeah.
uh,
So yeah, I think that's important. And maybe you can I don't know. Ivy, I don't know if you creators all hang out as a gang. I don't think so, but but it's something to think about because you are um, content creators on social media are some places where are also silos, and they could be a great source of information because you're not just taking it in, you're participating in it. So there's ways of making it really functional if people can, and if you're not always completing to be more outrageous than the next guy, you know?
I think that's a great idea. I do know a few larger, like I'm not that large of I'm kind of like in between. Like I have about 250,000 total followers. I'm not, you know, I'm not a nobody,
Um,
but there
Quarter of
are,
a million people is a lot of people.
you know,
Yeah.
like I'm not like people that like, the ones that have like a million followers on Twitter. Like
Right.
there's a whole tier, but I'm
Sure,
like a
of
double
course.
A professional baseball player. I still have a couple of, but I know people that are in the majors, so
Right.
maybe I can pitch that to them, and we could get something. I love the idea of that, and then you know at
Well, what
least
makes it work is there's natural consequences to not adhering to it,
yeah.
right? No one has to police each other. If you sign on to an agreement of how to make it a better place, people who don't do that tend to get shunned. They
Mhm.
start to lose engagement. So there's incentive to keep people honest if that's the agreement, right? No
And I
one.
think there would be something that just people's own sense of self-integrity and self-worth. Like,
Yeah.
just to be conscious, I made this pact, and so therefore I'm going to
Right, maybe. I mean, yeah, maybe that's a new identity and a new way of participating for content creators as well. You know, maybe it'll actually be less anxiety producing in the long run too, because you're not constantly pressured to keep people outraged or scared, you know, or give false hope through disinformation, which is what happens when you're forced to make content hourly.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's not always easy to come up with stuff. And the thing is you know, cheap, easy AI stuff you can
Exactly.
make more money off of than you can by actually doing like,
Yeah.
and that's why I say there's like both sides of it, right? Like we as consumers, I'm not speaking as a content creator right now, but as a consumer, what am I consuming? You know, am I going into somebody's Substack article, even if it's just a free subscriber, and reading it, and you know, somebody that actually put real work into writing something, am I reading that, or am I just yelling at Kash Patel on Twitter? Like,
right.
You know, that's like we need to have.
Well, and there's a time and place to yell at Kash Patel on Twitter.
Too.
Right. Yelling at Kash Patel is always fun once in a while, but you know, yes, I'm guilty of that too. I enjoy occasionally.
I know why he wears his eyeballs on the outside of his head, like.
Yeah, I just want to know why we have reality TV stars running the highest offices.
Yes, well, the country.
Yeah. So anyway, did you have any other questions about conspiracies in general? I mean, I covered the coping. It is a coping mechanism oftentimes because of its flexibility and adaptability. It can help you feel less powerless. It can help you feel you have special knowledge, and it can actually be a way of giving care to others by sharing that special knowledge. I've had people tell me things all the time that they do out of kindness that just aren't true. And so I think that it combats loneliness because it creates an automatic community to belong to. It gives you an identity. One of the first things Tammy told me when I met her is, I'm a little bit of a conspiracist. No. Okay. You know, so I think that's the title of the book is, you know, Women, Extremism, and the Lure of Belonging, because that's the dilemma. If you leave that, what do you go to? Like, what are liberal influencers offering? What are neutral, you know, just fun influencers offering? Someone who's spending 12 hours a day with a community, and then, you know, if you're shunned from that, you have nowhere to fall, nowhere to go. What do? You know, and again, especially middle-aged women who are caregivers now for parents and still kids or grandkids sometimes. You're spending most of your time online, and that's where your social life lives.
Yeah,
and I think that's true for liberals, not just conspiracists. I think people in general our age are finding most of their social interaction happens online.
So do you? I was going to ask you if you have somebody that is, you know, like in the cult, so to speak, how can you help them out? But since you haven't really had success with that, I guess.
Well, I haven't tried to push back.
I mean, it seems like because you haven't really been trying to.
No, because I was trying to use a different method. I was using a methodology originally for academia, but then for the book, the same thing. I still wanted to know their stories and understand. But what I've decided, and I cover that in the last book chapter of my book, is called soul contract, because that's one of the words that comes from Yvonne's world, and it's something she talks about often to me. And I started thinking about what a soul contract could mean, and I started thinking about it in ways less, you know, giving up my free will and just believing in higher dimensions. And instead I thought of it more of if I'm going to live in 3D, which is what Yvonne calls this, and 5D where she's going. If I'm going to live in 3D, how do I make that work? And how can I talk to people who aren't like me? How can I, if I want them to come back to a shared reality, shunning them and ostracizing them isn't going to help. Abandoning people isn't going to help. I didn't have the same emotional baggage that a family member might have, for example, or someone who had been a close friend for years. So it was easier for me to accept people for where they were at.
Did you
so
ever
that's one thing.
Did you ever just want to go off on her and just shred her?
No, I've been talking to her for 2 years before that. I knew her. I know her.
Okay.
And a lot of what you saw in the film, a lot of the constant talking about conspiracies was less for my benefit and more for Liz, the filmmaker, who was new to this. So she had a fresh student that she could teach along the way, which is probably why she became the focus for Liz, because that's where most of the interaction came from. But no, I feel like what I can do for them, I know facts aren't going to matter. I know policy changes aren't going to matter. It's how these things make them feel and how they allow them to cope with their lives. So I just gonna hang out, and I'm still their friend. And if someday they have a question, maybe they'll come to me and ask. And if they want to find somewhere to land, maybe they'll help them find it. That's what I can do. That's really all I can do for them, because I'm not going to change anyone's mind through bullying them or making fun of them or throwing facts in their face and then telling them they're dumb if they don't read it. Because it's so much more than that.
Leopard teeth scars on their face and say, I know what, like, I can't believe he did this. And then because you've kept that window open,
right,
and come to you,
right,
and you can actually have a real conversation with them
in
shared reality then. But if you shut them out of your life, they're not going to go to you, and they're never going to come back.
That's right. And that is a privilege I have, though, because I don't have a history here. I think it's harder for some of family members and to do it if they're not able to compartmentalize well. And some people are just sick of it or done with it, and I get that too. It can be exhausting, but I don't, for me, I'm very curious, and I really do want to understand people. And so I've been able to maintain relationships with both of these women. There's several women I talk to I don't maintain relationships with, because early enough on, I saw that their motivation, they were so transparent. I couldn't believe what they were telling me, because their motivation was either for attention and visibility or money or of some kind. And so I'm not going to learn from that. I'll learn that from the content creators I was talking about.
Yeah.
So, but that's kind of where I'm at with that, is I think, everyone's got their threshold. So I also have my threshold. I'm also not talking to people who are overtly racist or violent or, saying really awful stuff. That's not who these women are. They're basically, if we weren't in this moment politically, we really wouldn't even know their political affiliation, most likely. But again, I hope that some semblance of shared reality comes back, regardless of what the spirituality piece looks like. If we can start dealing in facts with what's actually happening on the ground, maybe there are some things we all could agree on, both sides could agree on, especially people who have participated in January 6th have come out big advocates for prison reforming. They've talked about the conditions in prison and how people are treated. And so,
as long as they're not illegal immigrants, I guess, then their ability to say this was bad, and and it's like, oh great, so you're against what's the word,
dehumanizing,
the cashless bail.
Right.
They're all for cashless bail when it's the January 6th defendants, but when it comes to anybody else, then it's like, oh, now we're anyway. One thing I was thinking when you were talking about it, and I wanted to ask, was the trad wives. And the trad wives, they get I don't know if the word is radicalized or what, but online, through this, through social media and whatnot, do they convert their husbands, or do their husbands convert them, or is it kind of like an in tandem thing?
I've not spent any time actually talking directly to trad wives, so I don't know what their motivation is. But when I was studying them more intensely before this book, I would say that the husbands are involved in this in some ways. There's also a religious element oftentimes, because there's no one brand of trad wife. There's some that just purely are doing it's the big floppy hats in the field while you've got corn in your skirt. So they're doing that. They want to live the feeling. There's others that are doing it, living like biblical womanhood, essentially. But the pandemic definitely brought those two worlds closer together through the aesthetic Instagrammers, biblical womanhood, and then the traditionalists. There's a whole category of accelerationists who want to see it all burn down. That was what really got me noticing that trad wives had a darker side, is when I kept seeing the hashtag revolt against the modern world. Well, that's a title of a book of a 1930s fascist Julius Evola, who was a rabid traditionalist. Bannon is an admirer of his. And his whole thing was burn it down and start it over, which when you really start to peel the layers back, turns into, oh, look, it's a white ethno state, right? And so that's kind of the identity of whiteness, is a big part of all of this, even though I would be told that's not true by most of the women I've talked to. But it is true. When you look at pictures of the entities from the higher dimensions, they all look like they're Scandinavian. There's definitely a whiteness thing going on there too. And again, get off the grid, go homestead. Okay, well, who's buying land? Who owns land? It's your destiny. It's your birthright. And so that all has a lot to do with whiteness, even though there's people who would not agree with that.
I think that there's a lot of them that, like, I'll see people even like in the trailer. She's talking about the elitists, and it's like Donald Trump is not an elitist for some reason, but like I don't think they realize this that that's an anti-Semitic term, like, and
there's a lot of anti-Semitic terms that they don't see.
Like they'll say really anti-Semitic things, and they'll pretend that like the left is anti-Semitic because people don't want Gaza bombed indiscriminately.
Right.
And so they're also defenders of Israel while they're saying that the elitists, are Hamas, or like they say things that are so logically inconsistent, and you wonder.
Which is interesting too, is all these different conspiratorial groups, whether they're QAnon conspiracies or they're anti-government conspiracies. The one thing many of them have in common is some kind of apocalyptic ending and a new beginning. And that's been interesting. It's the vocabulary is often different, but the messaging is very similar. Everyone kind of keeps in their lane and dabbles here and there from each other's, selections. But
and they want that apocalyptic ending. They want everybody that disagrees with them to die, and burn in hell.
Yeah, heaven on earth. Well, heaven on earth is, some people are going to ascend into a higher dimension, and others are going to stay where they are or be cast out into some kind of galactic sun. So, yeah, it's like it's a lot of the same kind of messaging.
But where the radicals?
Exactly.
Are you joining any terrorist activity tomorrow yourself, or are you just going to march in a protest instead?
I live in Palm Springs, so our protest is going to be people. I feel young at our protests usually because it's about 60 plus there, and I'm a couple years away from 60 still. But so it's really funny when I hear that terrorist protesting, because I'm literally looking around and the average age is middle aged again. This is not Black Bloc here. It's just not that. This is not activists. These are people who are fully willing to take full pictures of their face and post them online and say, I was here. So these are not activists. I mean, when I say activists, I mean in the traditional sense of all the time being activists out in the streets but this is really important. Things like this Nose Kings thing is actually important because it gives people an opportunity to participate. I think people underestimate that importance of any movement, the importance of being able to participate in some way and be a part of it, especially as we don't have much of that in the real world anymore.
And I think the other thing I've been considering is it's also like it's easy to stay at home and doom scroll a lot and feel frustrated and angry and isolated and alone. But when you're there with thousands of other people carrying signs, they may not agree with you on everything, but they agree with you on the Kings. and you feel a sense of community, of belonging. I think it
Yes.
gives you hope. It gives you
Yep.
soul food, not soul food, but soul food for your soul. Like it
Yes.
really help you just with your psychological well-being to just be
True.
a part of that.
I went to the original Women's March in DC in January
You are the
2017.
third guest I've had this, or no, 3, 4, 5, 6 guests this
Right?
week, if you count my panel that that were at that march. So sounds like
So,
it.
and yeah, I mean, there were problems. I mean, later on, as with most movements, there gets to be infighting and division, years later. But for that original Women's March, I'd never experienced anything like that before. I had never gone to a protest that size. And it was literally, I've never been with so many people in my life. And we were shoulder to shoulder, but you could feel the energy. And it was fuel. And it was inspiring, and it did bring hope. But it was about kindness. It was being with this group of people who were like-minded, who cared about others, who were supportive of each other. It was that feeling. That's the feeling. It's that feeling of belonging, and that feeling of, these are my people, and I'm not alone, and you feed out that energy. And because there's not that many opportunities for that sort of thing, it's done in groups and online, and it can go south fast. But
And
I know that feeling, and it's contagious.
people say, "Oh, what are you going to accomplish?" And I think if that's all it accomplishes, it accomplished a lot. Like
It's a
if all
movement
it does
builder.
is just give people some hope.
Absolutely. And people work off the method of hope. Without hope, what do you have? And it's also a movement builder. It keeps visibility, it keeps
Well, and that's
energy.
the thing, is you can't have a movement, you can't have a beginning unless there's hope for an ending. That you know what I'm saying. Like, so just
Well, think about it this too.
make it a start of something and not the end of something.
In 2017, Indivisible popped up, right, as a
Mhm.
national organization, and then it kind of regional. I was participating in the first, the Baltimore County Indivisible. When I was living in Baltimore at the time, I went to the Baltimore City Indivisible at the time. They were two different groups. I think they may have combined since, but like I got to go here. Like Elijah Cummings came to speak, and Senator, I'm blanking his name now, and he's a good one. What's the guy? He's still there. Oh, well, never mind. The other Maryland senator. We had them here, or congressman. We had them come to the meetings, and it was we were doing things and participating for a year. And then I moved back to California eventually. And but the Indivisible is still going. Is my point. That infrastructure was already built during 2017. There was already a national group. So when this all started, I don't know exactly who runs 5051. But I've seen, at least out here where I live, that it's been partnered with the name Indivisible in some capacity. And so I see, Indivisible has 8 years of having tried to keep the momentum of a movement, of building a movement. And so I think it is important. And I think the best way to divide and mess up people is the purity content. Well, that's not doing anything. So, but let them do it. You don't have to participate, but celebrate it, encourage it, promote it, because protest is a privilege for some people, and some people can only get out for one day on a weekend, when they don't have to hire childcare, or they don't have to pick up kids.
And there are a lot of people that either can't go because they're not here legally, or because they have family members.
There's lots of reasons.
There are some people that would want to go because their dad is not here legally, but they're afraid that if they go, then they're going to invite ICE to their house and take their dad. So it's like, especially if you don't have anything to worry about,
exactly,
then go in their place.
Although I would say right now, everyone has something to worry about to some degree. So so I think that's the other thing, that those of us who have been entitled to say and do what we please for the most part need to be a little more careful now too. I think that's but yes, but use your privilege.
They shot a priest in the head.
Yeah, exactly.
Pray for praying.
Exactly.
So I think at that point you can just say everybody's in trouble.
But I would say anyone willing to go out and spend their free time doing this should be celebrated and applauded. Even if I don't like their style, even if I disagree with certain things, as long as they're an honest person and they really do care about some kind of democracy that functions, I'm going to support them.
And
And
if you're not physically able to participate in the protest, if you
Mhm.
can, just throw some water bottles in the trunk of your car and
Oh yeah,
go to the protest and pop your trunk and let people just grab a bottle. Like,
right.
that protesting can get to be thirsty work and hungry work. Throw in some bags of potato chips, give them, some granola bars. Like, just give people some, what you can. And if you can't do any of
Right.
that, donate money. If you can't do any of that, share it online. Like, I see so many people saying nobody cares about this stupid protest, and I'm like, you don't have 20 million people showing up to a protest that nobody cares
Right.
about.
Right. No, I think it's definitely important. If you look again, I'm going to take you back to March of 2022 when that truck convoy left California and drove cross country to Maryland with the idea that they were going to shut down DC. Well, that didn't happen.
We couldn't find each other at the Buc-ee's in Texas. I thought that was hilarious.
Right. Well, they end up at the Hagerstown Speedway, right? And I went that March 5th, the first day. It was a Saturday. It was like being in a carnival. They had a funnel cake truck. They had fireworks at night. There was live music. It was a carnival. It was a movement builder. It was a way to get people to come to the fair, to meet your friends, to maybe even hook up with somebody from your Telegram fam and get to know them in person. And who knows? But it's a movement builder, and that happened. Across that was what the truck convoy was. That turned into a campsite for several weeks where people lived on site. Underneath the bleachers turned into a mutual aid store where people in the area, because it's a pretty conservative area of Maryland, would bring in coats and clothes and toys and books, and people could come and take what they need. Someone was going to the there had shower stalls on site. Someone needed a towel, so they went in and grabbed one from the free bin. There was free food day and night. All of that was donations and probably some funding from someone somewhere. But there were trucks coming cross country and doing stops at different places and picking up. People would go to Costco and fill the truck. I helped unload a giant truck with cases of water. And I was just amazed. If people had gone to Costco and probably spent several $100s to send supplies to the camp. And that's when I realized what this was. This was, I went back a second time for the day I helped unload the truck. I went the first day when it was a carnival, and I went back 2 weeks later when it was a village. And the village was when they had by 2 weeks later, they had an entire village set up. They had someone on site cutting hair. They had shower stalls. They had this store under the bleachers. And it was just locals were donating food from their farms. So there was always fresh produce. And people were donating food, grocery store. And you realize how much people wanted to participate. If they couldn't be camping out with you, they wanted to send food or they wanted to do something. And that went on for a while. And then it moved into the border convoy stuff. It was the same kind of movement building exercises, taken over now by a more Christian element of the movement. But they all work in coordination, cooperation, and they're smart. They know how to build community, and they know how to keep the momentum going. And I hope our side does that.
Yeah. We need to be better at that. I think, I've used South Korea as an example on several occasions too, where all the different sides, with their different goals, and we get into purity tests and stuff like that.
Right.
Like, don't debate the color of the curtains while the house is burning down. Like,
right.
Save the house first, then worry about the furniture. Like,
right.
And so like all these different groups in South Korea set aside their own personal goals and join together in the larger goal of to get rid of this dictator. And of course, being with North Korea right next to them and the history there, they were a lot more sensitive about like having a dictator take over than we are, and so I think we're too busy trying to rationalize that Donald Trump is not basically becoming an authoritarian leader. And, we're debating whether it's true on the news or not when it's obviously the case.
Right.
And so it's like, I love the idea that you're presenting, that we not just have the day, but build communities with the day.
Yes. Communities that can get the same momentum and the same feeling of they're doing something good by sharing truth instead of embellished information just to get you to react, you know? Let's start thinking more than, if we can think as much as react, we'll be a lot better off. Honestly, that really, and we're in an attention culture and using a medium that doesn't allow for much time to think. Everything's pretty instantaneous.
Yeah. I always get told, why are you making videos that are longer than 60 seconds? You know, and it's like, well, you know, sometimes things just take more than 60 seconds to understand. So anyway, I think that's all the questions I have. You've given me a lot to think about, and hopefully anybody else that listens to this.
I talk a lot. I'm sorry.
No. That's why you're on here, to do the talking. Everybody hears me all the time. But I'm gonna try and I'm gonna really give some thought and see if I can get something going on that content creator pact. I think
that'd be awesome.
Could set up a web page or something where you know, you just a petition that content creators sign, or not a petition, like a pact of some sort.
Right.
So
kind of a social contract of sorts.
Yeah, a social contract. Yes, and I belong to some groups in Threads or not in Blue Sky and Twitter, where I know some larger accounts than mine. We'll see. I'll see if we can get something together. I think that would be a great idea.
I mean, it's worth having a conversation. Starting a conversation anyway, I think.
Yeah, just a commitment to you know, these are, you know, things like if I post something that's not true without realizing it and I learn it's not true, I'll delete it, you know, and you know, I'll check my sources before I post something, and you know,
I'll provide my sources when I do post something. Yeah, that would be great. I would think that would be really helpful.
So you where can people find your book?
Well, the book isn't released yet. It's coming out on January 6th, the 5th anniversary of the Capitol insurrection. And the film is making its way through film festivals still. The next one it goes to is in November at the American Anthropological Association's annual conference through the Society for Visual Anthropology's film festival. So that'll be the time to present it to academics, which will be interesting to see, so they can see how I butchered the methodology.
I wouldn't even know the methodology.
There isn't really one when you're dealing with humans. That's the whole point, I think, and that's where the distinction lies. It's hard to. This is the other difference that influencers have that academics don't and journalists don't. You don't have time to actually get to know your audience or your people, whereas influencers are building relationships essentially with their followers, which is even more important. You're going to have a lot more impact in the long term, I think.
That's the hardest thing about doing, like, if you're speaking to an audience, and then you can like vibe off of them, like if you're in person, if you know if your joke landed or didn't land. But when you're on a video and it's a recording and it's like, you don't know if jokes land or not. You don't know if you thought this was a brilliant point, and you don't know if anybody else thought it was brilliant or if you just thought it was brilliant. Anyway.
One thing I will add to you that I've experienced a couple of times because I vet everyone that I talk to. You know, one thing I would suggest before anyone's platform, just Google them, do a search for them on Twitter or whatever platform they might, and just see if there's any controversy there. See what it's about. Are they lying? Are they consistently presenting things in false light? Are they consistently embellishing? Are they consistently making themselves a victim when they are called out? You start to see it after a while. And those are the people that, if you have some kind of social contract, those are the people as a group, as collectively, you say that's really not what we want our industry to be associated with, right? Because that's what I think, you know, is the difference between Life Magazine and National Enquirer kind of situation. There's one you're going to take seriously and the other one you're not. And if you want to be taken seriously and you want to be effective in what we're dealing with now, I think truth, honesty, integrity are the most important things we can do.
That sounds like a great idea. Screen who we support too.
Yes.
So okay, when those things are released, make sure you let me know, and I'll blast it on my
I
social
will.
media.
Thank you.
Would like to get you
I
some
will.
sales there. And you've been a wonderful guest. Thank you for not putting too much burden on me to ask questions. It's actually really helpful. Like, this is my goal with these things, is I just want the experts to like run free and talk, and I can just occasionally chime in something. So I'm here to learn, not teach.
Good.
So
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. And I'm glad. Thank you for asking me to be here.
okay.
And I enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming on.
Okay. Thanks.